novom broju lista Zbilja, Republika Srpska, uspio projekat srpskog naroda. Zagreb je direktno komandovao pogromom duž Save. Siniša Kovačević, elita za Novog Baju, ispovest bivšeg jezuite. Sva zla ovoga sveta režiraju se u Vatikanu. Paklena zamisao. Ovo je katolički plan za Srbiju. List za kulturu, umetnost i društvena pitanja Zbilja. Slušate i gledate emisiju Inforatnici protiv novog svetskog poretka. Autor Miljan Glišić. Gost emisije Biljana Đorović.
Mr. Wright, you are in Serbia for the first time, and it is the part of your world tour. And what are your impressions of Serbia, of Belgrade so far?
Well, first of all, I think it's a lovely place, and I've been very lucky with the weather. It's been beautiful since I came here. And I went to Bosnia yesterday to do an interview, and it looks a lovely place, the countryside. But what really has struck me is that I'm not saying the mainstream media in Serbia is perfect. I'm not saying it's anything like perfect. But I am comparing it with the mainstream media in the West. And I've done now 2 live interviews on mainstream television, and another one yesterday, an hour and a half in Bosnia. And I thought I'd entered a parallel universe. Because if those interviews had been conducted in the West, in the mainstream, they would have been laughing, dismissing. Instead, I've been asked intelligent questions by intelligent people who actually had some idea, more than some idea, of what I'm actually saying, and even some of the more detailed stuff. So it's been a joy for me to be able to talk in the mainstream to big audience programs in a way that never happens in the West. The Western media, and this is why the Western governments get away with so much, it's childlike. I mean, if you look now at CNN, that has been attacking Donald Trump all the way through, and then he agrees to fire 59 Tomahawk missiles on Syria, and the CIA or CNN, actually that's a real Freudian slip, because we are talking about the same thing, of course. In fact, Anderson Cooper, one of the main hosts of CNN, was an intern at the CIA, very appropriately. But and then when he bombs Syria, the CNN are saying, "Today Donald Trump became president." You know, as if bombing people makes you a proper president. So the childlike nature of the mainstream media in the West is an absolute major reason why the Western governments, particularly Britain and America, the dynamic duo of world terrorism, get away with what they do, because they're not challenged.
Yes, certainly. And I want to ask you a question from the side that you are a dot connector. It is very interesting, should we call it coincidence, in dates. You are born on 29th of April, and on your birthday you appeared in 1991 at Terry Wogan's show that's skyrocketing you.
Yeah.
And here it is, you're 65. Birthday will be in Sava Center.
Yeah.
Center in...
Yeah, I mean, Jamie, my son, who organises the tour, said, "Do you mind speaking on your birthday?" And absolutely not. I mean, I wouldn't want to do anything on my birthday or any other day, really, than be communicating this information, because it's nearly 30 years now since I started out, about 27. to me now, it's dreamland. It's not a case of, like it has been for much of the last 27 years, which is banging your head against a wall, people not wanting to listen, people not being interested, people ridiculing you in the street, throwing eggs at your house, and all that stuff. It's all happened over the years. But now, suddenly, I've been on this world tour since June 2016, and wherever I've gone, I've seen the same thing. More and more people opening their minds to a different view of the world, and not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of kinds of people. People who you might have called system people, who work in the system. You thought the system would have their perceptions for life. They're now, more and more of them are even saying, actually, what is going on? So to be speaking about this on my birthday is great. It's I wouldn't want to do anything else really. And I've been taken aback as well since I've been in Serbia at the number of people that are aware of this information. It's been very, very encouraging to see, and I hope that this awareness of what's happening and what the agenda is will ensure that Serbia does never join the European Union and does never join NATO, which are absorbing assimilation organisations of the political, financial and military power of sovereign states. That's why Britain, a majority in Britain, have voted to come out of the EU, because it was said in the Brexit that most of the people that wanted to come out and voted to come out were older people, and the young wanted to stay in. But there's a reason for that. I am, as you said, I'm coming up to my 65th birthday. So people of my age and a little bit younger were able to see Britain before the EU, whereas young people have only known the EU. It's this experience of seeing British sovereignty diluted on a massive scale, where something like 60% or more of laws that change life in Britain do not start out in the British Parliament. They start out with the dark suit bureaucrats in the Brussels Commission. And this is what awaits anyone who joins the European Union. And because it's taken longer for this process for Serbia to go in, it's been a very good thing, because it's given people time to see the European Union for what it really is. And there's rebellion against it all over Europe. And if the French were given a referendum, if the Dutch were given a referendum, and other countries, they would also vote to come out. That's why they're not going to give them a referendum unless certain parties get in.
And do you see the main issue in the French presidential election, national sovereignty and the future of France at stake?
Well, that's what Marine Le Pen says, and I think it's true in the sense that the European Union project, as they call it, is not something that's static. As I've been saying all these years, where it is now is not where it's meant to stay. The idea is that the European Union absorb more and more countries, and therefore centrally control more and more land and more people, and that centralisation of control gets more and more extreme. They're not interested in 60-65% of laws for sovereign states starting out in Brussels. They want them all. And when you've got a situation, there was an advisor to the former British Prime Minister David Cameron, who when he was in Downing Street, and he came out last year and said that David Cameron, Prime Minister of Britain, was finding out about laws that changed British society on the television news, laws that started out with the Commission in Brussels and had no input from the UK. This is the nature of the European Union, for a simple reason. if there's a few of you and you want to control the many, you have to incessantly centralise decision making. The more you centralise decision making, the more the few have greater control over even more. This is why we have globalisation. This is why we have the European Union, and we have centralisation in every area of our lives, not least centralisation of power through corporations over finance and commerce. And what is happening, and I've seen it all over the world, is that we've reached a point, it's a really pivotal point, where enough people have at least reached that stage where they've looked at it and said it doesn't matter which party you vote for that has any chance of forming a government of the old parties. The same things happen. It might call it a socialist party, it might call themselves a centre party, they might call themselves a Republican party, but the same thing happens in government. Why? Because there's a hidden hand that controls where that direction goes, whoever's in power. And so we've seen this reaction, this response now to this. First of all, with Brexit, there's no way that the British people in those numbers would have voted against the direction and the fear-mongering of the British political establishment, from left to most of the right, much before they did. They would have said, they would have been frightened into acquiescence. Oh yeah, well, I don't like it, but maybe it'll be worse if we come out. This was the thing. I mean, they said everything, but Godzilla was going to attack London the morning after we came out. If we did, well, we did, and Godzilla was nowhere to be seen. Of course, it was all fear-mongering. And then you look at Trump. Now, Trump is not a drainer of the swamp. He has been swimming in it his entire life. But what got him in was not what he was, but the perception of what he was, which was anti-establishment. Then you've got builders in the Netherlands, and again, it was said that, he didn't do as well as expected. Excuse me, given what he was saying, the fact that he got so many votes was extraordinary. Same with Le Pen. I mean, Le Pen's party, not that long ago, had about 4%. Now she's in a runoff for the presidency. When I was in Iceland recently, the anti-establishment party there is not of the right, it's of the left. The Pirate Party. When I was in Croatia about a month ago, there's about 8 MPs in the Croatian Parliament from a party called the Human Shield Party, or Human Wall Party, that is basically coming from the direction I'm coming from. That's the reaction against the establishment. So it takes different forms, but the common theme is people are sick and tired of the left-right, everything the same establishment, which has run politics since politics began. And there is this awakening, this realization that actually it is all rigged, and it's only the start, but it's a very significant start. And if you see the kind of bewilderment in the eyes of the bureaucrats when they're talking about Brexit, and they see the rise of Le Pen and all this stuff, I mean, their plan for Europe is under challenge, and it's not necessarily that that these parties will necessarily win this time round. I mean, they might. They did with Brexit in terms of the perception, the reaction, the challenge. But this is not going away, because the European Union is not going to get any better. It's going to get worse. So eventually there will be a political change, and it will be the end of the European Union, because people are sick of being centrally controlled, and about time too.
Yes, and it will be great if we could hear your overall analysis on Donald Trump. And you were among a few researchers who immediately saw that deception called Donald Trump.
Well, people would ask me a long time ago, back in the 90s when I was in America, is the president involved? And my reply was, is he the president? Okay? So he's involved. Not necessarily involved in it, he's running everything. Presidents don't run everything. But is he at the very least a pawn of that which does run it? Well, yes, or he wouldn't be president. When you look at the amount of money it takes to run, even to get the nomination from your own party, never mind run for the presidency itself, when you see the background to Trump, as with the background to Clinton, there's, as I said about Bill Clinton, and it applies to Hillary Clinton, and it applies to Donald Trump, these people have not got skeletons in the cupboard, they've got whole cemeteries in the cupboard, right? And if you want to stop them winning, then reveal it. Because they have the power to reveal it. They control the mainstream media in America and most of Britain as well. So the fact that Trump came through 17 other possible challenges to get the nomination, that everyone was against him, but somehow he still won. And you looked at his background, and you saw him talking about draining the swamp, and then you looked at his life story, where he's been swimming in it, like I say, all his life, then obviously it didn't make any sense whatsoever. And there's a pattern here if you look at it. They know that people in larger numbers are starting to see that it's rigged. So what they have to do is try to sell someone as if they're different, to try to persuade people that, oh, well, yeah, rigged. It has been rigged, but this one's different. So you had Boy George Bush, and he was considered to be, quite rightly, a right-wing Republican warmonger and puppet of the establishment. Okay. So then your next challenger is, or your next choice, is Barack Obama. Because what did Barack Obama do? He came in, and if he said change, once in a sentence, he said it, 3 or 4 times. Change, I'm different, I'm change, I'm different. I'm about peace and all this. I'm going to close Guantanamo Bay. Last time I looked, it was still open. And so he comes in, and the progressive wing of America, if you like, political wing of America, got him in, plus the middle ground that went with the progressives. Just as with Bush, you had the right wing and a bit of the middle ground that got him in. And there wasn't one year in the 8 years of Obama when America was not at war with someone. I've talked many times about the project for the New American Century that became known as the neocons or neoconservatives, and they produced this document in September 2000 listing a series of countries to be regime changed, and they were Syria and Iraq and Libya and Iran and North Korea and China, and of course when those neocons, including Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and Doug Zackheim, who controlled the whole Pentagon budget, and Dick Cheney, all these people, when they came to power with the Bush administration, they started picking those countries off. This is why they lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, because it's on the list for regime change. They didn't have an excuse, so Bush and Blair and the people behind them made one up called weapons of mass destruction. But then Bush left the presidency. Tony Blair ceased to be Prime Minister of Britain. Now Bush, Republican, is replaced by Obama, who's apparently the opposite party, the other choice, Democrat. And Tony Blair is eventually replaced, Tony Blair, Labour Party, in Britain, is replaced by the opposition in the form of David Cameron, Conservative Party. So now you've got 2 different people in 2 different parties, but the list goes on being picked off. So after Iraq, we had Libya, which was a Cameron, Obama, Hillary Clinton NATO operation, where you bomb the innocent to save them from violence. That was the line. Then you have the same people triggering the so-called People's Revolution, it wasn't at all, in Syria, trying to get rid of Assad because he's on the list of regime change. So when you kind of break it down, it's not just some theory that you pull out of the air, they're all the same and they're all controlled by the same people. It's demonstrably true. So then we move to Trump. Now Trump is saying he's different to Obama. Now what you're looking for now is this combination of the right plus enough middle ground to get him in. When you want a Democrat president, you want the progressive wing and a bit of the middle ground to get them in. So now Trump's come in. Trump is now saying the opposite to Obama. He's saying no more should America be regime changing. No more should it be involved in foreign wars. Let's make peace with Russia. And a lot of Trump's support, ironically, came from the alternative media in America. Because the alternative media in America and those that get their information through the alternative media in the US have a certain, many of them have a certain almost John Wayne-like American belief system where, and the numbers have got very large. Now Trump wants them. Because if you're going to go right and a bit of the middle ground, then a major part of that combination, you want as many of those people that get their information from the alternative media as you can. And I'm not talking about the alternative media in its true sense. I'm talking about the American alternative media, which is so American-centric. It's not global-centric, it's not humanity-centric, not that there aren't alternative outlets in America that are like that, but a lot of them are very American-centric. Again, it's like a John Wayne film, a lot of it. And so Trump goes on the Alex Jones show. And gets interviewed, and Alex and others like him get behind Trump, and he's telling them what they want to hear. He's telling them they're going to make America great again, that he's against globalization, which they've been arguing about, as I have, for all these years. That he doesn't believe in the official story of global warming, though he blamed the Chinese for it, which was nonsense. And that he didn't want to keep invading countries. This was all what they wanted to hear. And that he was going to take on the swamp dwellers. He was going to take on Goldman Sachs. He was the man that was going to do it. And then he gets into power. And it's the same thing, it's the same as all of them. Tell them what they want to hear, so they vote for you, then do what you were going to do all along. So, what we've had with Trump, almost the first thing he did was put Goldman Sachs in charge of the US economy. Not only did he make Steve Mnuchin Treasury Secretary, he made a Goldman Sachs man of long standing. The Deputy Treasury Secretary is a Goldman Sachs man. He then this guy Colm, who was CEO of Goldman Sachs, he's made him director of the US White House Economic Council. Goldman Sachs have been handed the American economy. Goldman Sachs that have wreaked absolute carnage around the world in people's lives financially. Not least in the foreclosure of their homes, not least in the catastrophe that was the Greece economic collapse, and now he's handed the Treasury to them. He then hands Homeland Security, which is a domestic security, to a military man. He then hands the Defense Secretary role, which to balance out the military must be a civilian. He hands that to a military man who's so crazy, his nickname is Mad Dog. I mean, to have a man in charge of the US military called Mad Dog, I mean, sleep well. And then his national security advisor, McMaster, is another military man. He's now pushing and the administration is pushing, and this guy Sessions, Attorney General, is pushing for prosecution of Julian Assange, and they're vehemently against Edward Snowden, this whistleblower of the NSA. And so now we've gone so far that the man who was supported by the alternative media, his administration is targeting those that have done so much to get information out that the alternative media wants to get out. So in every way, Trump is basically standing on his head. And I do hope that this is so blatant for people. I'm not sure it will be for some, but this is so blatant that maybe they'll say, hey, there is no point in thinking we're going to change things through the political system as it stands. We're not. We're going to change things by not cooperating with the political system. Not through violence, not even necessarily through protest in the streets, but by simply not cooperating with them. Because when you've got, like in America, 320 million people, there's a video on YouTube which, if people put in English, the tiny dot, it's an animated video showing the tiny number of people that actually control those 320 million. It's ridiculous. And that can only happen because the 320 million cooperate, even though they don't like it, with the tiny few, the tiny dot as they call it. And this is the way. These people can only impose their will upon us if we acquiesce to what they do in large numbers. And that's why they have to keep persuading us that actually a politician is going to change it. And it will be someone else next time. It will be someone else next time with another vaudeville image that will be different. I mean, look at them. How much different on the surface could you get Bush and Obama and Trump? And yet the policy is just the same.
Is it by accident that this attack on Syria happened on the very same day when Chinese President Xi Jinping was eating his dessert with Donald Trump? What is that? War and Chocolate reality show? Yeah, well,
it's obviously not an accident, but you know, I describe Donald Trump as a little boy in short trousers. He is a reality TV host. That's really his forte. And when you've just dropped 59, 60 Tomahawk missiles on Syria, and the whole foundation of your explanation to the media is based on the fact that you and the Chinese leader were eating a chocolate cake at the time. I mean, this is a parallel universe. I mean, this is just crazy. And the idea that, I mean, there was another interview when he was saying that he was sending, well, he wasn't. He was just being told, basically, it was being sent, and then he decided it. This, what he called Armada towards North Korea. Oh, we're sending submarines. Very powerful. Very powerful. This is a child. This is a child playing a video game. Oh, I've got me powerful, powerful. And that's who's in charge of the United States, because he's not. This military policy is being played out through him, not by him. So you've got to look to Mad Dog Mattis, you've got to look to McMaster, you've got to look at these neocons who are now back in charge behind the Republican Party. This is where it's coming from. And therefore the agenda they're following is irrelevant to Trump, it's irrelevant to Obama, it's irrelevant to Bush. They're just front people to give you the idea that you've chosen the leader. You haven't. Because I say to people, don't look at the here today, gone tomorrow politicians. They're just to keep you occupied. Think you've got some choice. Look at those that never change. And what never changes is the military command. What never changes is the intelligence community networks. These are always there. And I'll give you an example. All over the world, not least all over America, are underground bases they call DUMBs, deep underground military bases. The President of the United States does not have a security clearance high enough to know what goes on there. So who's making those decisions? Because presidents come and go, and they're just front men and puppets, they're not considered secure enough to be let know what goes on there. Because one day they might spout it out. So they're not allowed in. They're not allowed to know. So who's making those decisions? Answer that question, and you'll be close to who's actually running America and the wider world. And it's not anyone that we see.
You were talking about Alex Johnson, InfoWars, and really it is a great disappointment for his viewers all around the world, because he turned his wonderful program into Trump propaganda station, and it is really unbearable. If you listen to Steve Pachanik, intelligence officer, and his rhetoric toward the greatness of America that has to be shown all over the world, and we will show them who the boss is. This is the quotation. And it is really unbearable. And what has happened to Alex Jones? Because when you analyze the situation in the Middle East, you know about the plans for Greater Israel and Yinon plan, and all the plans are at stake. Alex Jones also should have known of these plans, but he never mentioned them. How do you explain?
Well, another thing that has changed, and changed quite obviously, was when Trump started going on his anti-Muslim rants. And, you know, there's shades of grey. There are things about the extremes of the Muslim world. Overwhelmingly, they're not really Muslims. They are the Wahhabi faith, which comes out of Saudi Arabia, which is what the ISIS follow. It's not true Islam. It's the Wahhabi faith, which is a very extreme manufactured version of it. Which is why what ISIS do in terms of beheading people and all this other stuff is what the Saudi Arabia royal family do, because they're both the same. And that's why Saudi Arabia fund ISIS on behalf of America. But up to this point, when there was a terrorist attack, say in Europe, it was analysed. It was questioned whether this was what they call a false flag, or a engineered event to create what I call problem, reaction, solution. You create the problem, you get the reaction, fear, do something, and then you offer the solution. And the solutions that are offered after every terrorist event are more and more control and more surveillance and more imposition of the authorities upon the public. Once Trump started to talk and go on about the Muslim and the Islamic dangers, when there were terrorist attacks in Europe from then on, it was no longer, well, does the official story stand up? It was, see, it's the Muslims. And the change was so dramatic that you thought something's gone on here. And I think part of it, I mean, I obviously am not standing on their shoulder, so I'm not aware of everything that's gone on. But I would say this: it depends where your point of reference is. If your point of reference is, where I'm coming from, my point of reference is I am consciousness, I am awareness. My body is a vehicle for my awareness to experience this reality. Everyone else's awareness is an expression of the same awareness that I am. So that's the point that I'm coming from. So therefore, when I'm looking at situations, I'm not looking at a religion, I'm not looking at a country, I'm not looking at a race, I'm not looking at a label. I'm looking at the entirety. Every time that, you know, I'm deciding whether I'm going to post a story or say this or do that, the question is, what is right, what is fair, and what is just in this situation? So sometimes it's right and it's just to expose Islam, or what calls itself Islam. But in another aspect, in another situation, the fair and right thing to do is to defend it. So there is no contradiction between exposing the absolutely extraordinary abuse and carnage that the West has caused in Islamic countries and Arabic countries, and at the same time challenge what some Muslims do in Europe. Because it's what's right, what's fair for everyone from the perspective of that situation. If your point of reference is I am an American, and America is the greatest country in the world, right? Then that colours the way you see everything. Now it's big America. It's John Wayne. John Wayne is reincarnated. John Wayne's back. Oh, to hell I am. And all that stuff. And that's now your point of reference. So now John Wayne's saying, if China get in our way, we'll nuke you. And all that stuff. That's John Wayne speaking. When you see Alex on the videos. And therefore it's a completely different point of reference which colours how you see the world. And I come from Britain. I was born in Britain because I had to be born somewhere or on some piece of land, or otherwise I would have drowned. But I'm not British. That's a place where I live. I'm concerned with what is fair and what is just and what is my perception of what is right. Therefore, there's no greater critic of me than what Britain has done over the years. I don't have a point of reference that says I am British and it's Great Britain. We're the best in the world. Because Britain and the United States, going back in terms of Britain, way back, are the greatest terrorist nations on earth. And they do it while claiming to be morally superior, which kind of turns your stomach. The Balkans have had experience of this dynamic duo, and so many other areas of the world have, and it sickens me. The British Empire sickened me. You see, I can question and criticise the vast exodus of people out of Middle East and North Africa into Europe, because on the basis of sheer mathematics, I've just come back from Sweden, they can't cope. But at the same time, I can criticise just as vehemently the British Empire, which did the same, imposed its will upon countries across Africa, across Asia, and across the Middle East. Because your point of reference is what is fair, what is just, what is intelligent in this situation. And what's intelligent in terms of migration into Europe is that the numbers can't be coped with. And when the numbers can't be coped with, and when a different culture is meeting another culture in large numbers in a short space of time, as with the reverse, with the colonial empires, there has to be upheaval, there has to be conflict. That's the way things are when that happens. And so then you ask yourself, why in a very short space of time so many people have been allowed into Europe, and if they're fleeing war, families fleeing war, people fleeing war, I'm the first one to say, we've got to help them. Not least because the West has created the wars, but if you look at the pictures of the great movements of people into Europe, the vast majority, they are young adult men, and that has, in such numbers, in such a short time, that has got to have a situation that is going to be upheaval. And so the question then is why? Why is it not only been allowed to happen, but clearly when you do the research, has been encouraged to happen? Why did Chancellor Merkel not open the doors suddenly to people fleeing war, but to anybody? That fantastic number of people went into Germany in a very short time. Why? Well, first of all, Chancellor Merkel is an asset of this cabal, down to her very DNA. So if she's doing it, then there's a reason for it to benefit them. George Soros the billionaire financier who gives evil a bad name, he has been pressing for more people to be allowed in. So therefore, when George Soros speaks, when his lips are moving, then the cabal is speaking. So they obviously want this to happen. But why? Because they want to break up European cultures, because they want to break up sovereign states. And if you look at what is the biggest resistance to people not wanting their sovereign state to disappear and go into some kind of regional blob, it's their sense of history, their sense of culture, their sense of being different. So they want to break that down, and they want one blob culture. And the other thing they want, the classic that every tyranny wants when the few are seeking to manipulate the many, they want divide and rule. So what's happening is you've got the mass of the migrants coming in, and there are strings attached to them held by this hand, hidden hand. Then you've got the indigenous population, and there's strings attached to them that are held by the same hidden hand, and the two are being played off against each other. So they're both, whether it's the indigenous population or it's the migrants, they're both pawns in a game that most of them don't understand, and they're being played off against each other. So, when I was in Sweden recently, it's not the same country. I mean, and what's happening is there's a political party there called the Swedish Democrats, which is basically like a Le Pen party or a Wilders party, and that's got massive increase in votes and representation in a very short time, and it's both another expression that people are sick of the establishment and what it's done, but it's also an expression of this building resentment to mass migration, which is designed to explode in Europe. And in America, you've got the same George Soros, who is funding organizations that are seeking to create a race war in America between black and white, basically. All lives matter and Black Lives Matter, rather. All lives matter, what it should be called. But Black Lives Matter and these other so-called progressive organizations, so many of them operate with Soros funding. Why would a billionaire who has been quoted publicly as saying when he's doing his investments that the social costs are not even considered by him, it's just business. Why would he be funding progressive organizations? Why would he be funding Black Lives Matter? Because he wants this divide and rule in America, just as the same people want it in Europe. And the antidote of all of this, and it's going to take a long time coming, but it's starting to happen with more aware people, is we've got to put down these fault lines of division, manufactured division, called race and religion, and come from the perspective of this is the religion I believe in. I mean, I don't believe in any of them, but this is my religion, fair enough. This is my culture, fair enough. And that just because I believe it, just because this is my culture, does not mean I have to impose it on everyone else. And then we can live together, and we can live our lives as we see fit. But once you get to this point where my dot's better than your dot, therefore my dot must have the power, my dot must take over from you, then you're always going to create the division, the resentment, the frustration, and the fear that is going to break out in violence, which it does. It does break out in Sweden. It does break out in Germany. And you've got the head of police in France saying a few months ago that civil war is inevitable because of what's going on there. So this is not happening by chance. It's happening by design. And I quote someone in my last book, Fans Himself, as a man called Dr. Richard Day, who was a big Rockefeller family insider. And he was a executive of Planned Parenthood, which is a Rockefeller organization, which, by the way, started out in the eugenics movement. And because the Rockefellers were big eugenicists, I mean, it was the Rockefeller eugenicist experts and Rockefeller money that funded the eugenicist movement in Nazi Germany. The Rockefellers funded a whole floor of a university in Germany for a guy called Ernst Rudin, who was Hitler's race purity expert. That's where it all came originally. And so this Dr. Richard Day stood up at a meeting of pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1969, and no one seems to know why. But he asked people to turn off the recording equipment and asked them not to take notes because he was going to tell them how the world was going to change. And I quote him at length in Phantom Self. What he said that day in 1969, as an insider, is stunning, not just in the fact that the themes he said are all happening, but the detail he described. I mean, he described the World Wide Web was supposed to have been invented in, 1989? He described it in 1969 that night. He described smart TVs that could record you and film you in your own front room. He described them in 1969 that night. George Orwell described them with his telescreens in 1948. We've got a bell going off. Someone wants to come in. But the point I would make about what we've just been talking about is he said that night in 1969 that there were going to be manipulated mass migrations into other countries of different cultures, because these were his words, it's much easier to transform countries where there are a large number of people who have come in from outside and have no roots in that place, thus no roots in its culture. So even in that, and also, by the way, he talked in 1969, he said there were going to be lots of terrorism in Europe as part of making Europe change. So these things are not happening by accident, they're happening by design. And the more we realize that, the less we'll be fooled by the idea that events in the world, society transforming events, are actually random and by accident. They're not, they're by design.
Yes, and you count on people, but we see, and history has shown, that people are obedient to power. They do not challenge power. They want to be obedient, and they are like a sheep, and this process really turns most young men into zombie state, into sheep-like state. They are manipulated, and they count on the youth.
One of the things I do, in fact, right at the start of the talk on Saturday, the first 30-40 minutes, is going through a human lifetime and showing it to be a perceptual download from the moment we enter the world to the moment we leave it. It's a perceptual download. And one of the aspects of this program, this mind program, is education. Because it's not education, it's indoctrination. And if you look at school, you come into the world, and what is it, 3, 4, 5 years maximum, and you're suddenly, every day of the week, weekends accepted, and then there's homework, you are in the hands of the state, with a representative of the state telling you what the state has told them to tell you, called a teacher. And there are rules and regulations. You are told from the moment you walk in the school, at 4 or 5 years of age, you're told when you have to be there, when you can leave, when you can talk, when you can eat, when you can go to the toilet. And if you break these rules, then there are punishments. So what is happening from the very earliest age is that the youngest of children are being programmed to fear authority and to fear breaking rules. And then you go through your all your formative years, when all your perceptions for life are basically formed, for those that don't look elsewhere for their information. And the idea is to get people from the earliest age in this mode of fearing authority, of fearing breaking rules or not obeying rules, and for that to continue through your entire life. And, I see people, they'll complain about some new law which is taking their freedoms away or imposing it on their lives. And instead of saying, well, we must challenge this, we must have mass refusal to comply with it, they complain about it. Oh, it's terrible. You hear this a lot in Britain. It's Big Brother gone mad. So what are you going to do about it? Well, it's the law, isn't it? What can you do? And so there you go. Follow the law. Follow the rules. Follow the rules. Follow the rules. When you break it down, and I do on Saturday, when you break it down, all the formative emotional reactions of adults are actually formed at a very early age, and it's done systematically in school. And you've basically got prisoners developing and policing prisoners. The prisoners are the children, and the other prisoners, the prison warders, who are themselves prisoners, are the teachers. Because if the teachers do not follow their rules, i.e. teach children what they're told to teach them through the curriculum they're told to teach, then they won't be teachers for very long. So it's a hierarchy of fear, and everyone's following the rules. You follow my rules, I'll follow the rules above me, they follow the rules above them. And it's a hierarchy of following the rules. And we've got to break this perception that just because it's a rule that it must be followed. It must earn its place. It must justify itself by how fair it is, how necessary it is, how freedom supporting it is, rather than freedom destroying. So, as I've said all the years, and it's the whole foundation of the talk on Saturday, the revolution is a revolution of perception. That's what's going to change everything. Our perceptions, the perceptual download that people take on and believe to be how things are and how they are and what they are, that's got us into this mess. We need a complete perceptual re-evaluation, both of the world, who controls it, and most important of all, of the nature of who we are. Because if we go on self-identifying, not with being awareness, having an experience, but with being that experience, then if we self-identify with our name, our race, our religion, our life story, then we are identifying with the realm of limitation, the realm of I can't, the realm of I have no power. And that's why they want people to go through their entire lives perceiving the world and themselves only through the five senses. Once you start to self-identify with being awareness, infinite, eternal awareness, having that experience, your sense of power, your sense of what you can do and how you can take control of your own life and your own world completely changes. It's that perceptual change that's necessary. If that doesn't happen, nothing will change. And that is why, if you look at this society that we live in, all over the world, doesn't matter what country, everything is focused on controlling perception, everything. And this is where this whole fake news hoax comes from. Because the alternative media has given vast numbers of people worldwide another narrative, a different way of looking at the world and explaining world events. It started to change perception. And if your whole conspiracy of control is to control the perception of the masses, which you have to control them, then suddenly there's a danger here. Because perceptions are starting to change, because there's another information source here called the alternative media. So what happens? They use this fake news hoax to censor, not least through algorithms on the internet and YouTube and Facebook, to censor alternative information, because they're terrified of it. And that's what it's all about in the end. Who controls perception? Do we control our perception, or does the state control our perception? That is the difference between freedom and slavery.
I wanted to ask you about those laws that are eugenic laws and genocidal laws imposing on the governments. Serbian parliament has passed the law on mandatory vaccination, and now it is on the way to pass the law that will turn every citizen on at organ donor, and it is really Kabbalistic and monstrous.
Yes, I mean, there are many definitions of fascism, but I've yet to come across one that is more accurate than forcing people to take into their own bodies and their children's bodies what they don't want to take in. If we do not have the freedom to decide what goes into our own bodies and what goes into our children's bodies, then there are no freedoms left worth the name. And this is this is how it works. So long as people acquiesce voluntarily, no need for mandatory anything, because the people are doing it anyway. So it's not a problem. But when people start to, as with vaccines, they start to say, well, hold on a second, I'm looking at this and I'm not sure I want this in my body, I'm not sure I want it in my child's body. And this has been growing around the world. Now there's a problem, because they want this stuff in the body because it has physical effects and it has mental and psychological effects and other effects too. And so they're not doing it voluntarily in enough numbers anymore, so we must make it mandatory. This is why it's coming in. Because if you look at some countries now, by the age of 17, young people have had up to 74 vaccinations. You're having these toxins being injected into the youngest of children before their immune system has even formed. That immune system's never going to be what it could be once that happens. I mean, there's a big fellow over there, my son, 6'5" and strappingly all that healthy and stuff. Never had a vaccine in his life, and he didn't get childhood diseases. His mates did, who had the vaccines. So I think that instead of saying you can't come to school because you've not been vaccinated, maybe we ought to say you're not coming to school because you have been vaccinated. You're a threat to those who haven't been. And it's a nonsense, but it's there because of the effect it has. If people acquiesce to it, fair enough, leave them to it. But if they don't, make them mandatory. That's what we're seeing now, and people must not have it. They must not have it. Not, one of the greatest of human diseases is route of least resistance. Oh, well, I don't like it, but. No, there's no but. Don't have it then. Don't accept it then. Because it's no good complaining about something and say, well, that's really bad, and accepting it happens. We've got to say no. And if enough people say no, then it can't happen. But it's enough people saying no that we need to build, because at the moment more and more people are saying no, but nothing like enough.
I wanted to ask you two more questions if you have time.
Okay.
One is related to the document. You've discussed and analyzed quiet weapons for silent wars. And it is really a very huge attack on humanity through electromagnetic radiation. What is the purpose of electromagnetic radiation and how to fight against it?
Well, on Saturday, there's the best part of an hour of very concentrated information at the end of part 3, where I go into all this, and there's a heck of a lot of dots to connect. But to keep it brief, they are developing a technological sub-reality. By that I mean they are creating a technological network which is based on what is called smart technology. The reason so many things are called smart today is because it's all part of the same network of control of humanity by technology. We now have people like the global spokesman for Frankenstein, Ray Kurzweil, an executive of Google, who is saying that the human brain will be attached to what he calls the cloud, the technological sub-reality, by 2030. And we're now in 2017, of course. And these are his words, and that once that connection starts, over a period, humans will do less and less of the thinking, and artificial intelligence will do more and more through the cloud and the technological connection, until there is no human thinking anymore, and it's all artificial intelligence. Now, why would they tell us this? Because of the sales pitch. The sales pitch is it will make us superhuman. It will make us beyond anything we've ever believed we can be. It will not make us superhuman, it will make us subhuman, because we will now be artificial intelligence and not human intelligence. They don't tell you that, even though they know it. And so then, in that sense, Ray Kurzweil is the bad cop who's coming out with it, saying it's a good thing. And then you've got people like Elon Musk, the co-founder of PayPal, and who puts rockets and satellites up through his SpaceX organization, and Tesla cars he runs and all that stuff. And he's saying, actually, attaching humans to technology and being controlled by robots is a really bad thing. But then he goes on to say, but if we're not going to be controlled by machines, i.e. the Matrix, we're not going to be controlled by machines, then we've got to be attached to artificial intelligence, or the machines will become more intelligent than us and take over, right? So why are we developing artificial intelligence that's going to take over us? How about stopping that? But that's never an option. The outcome is always, it's a great thing to be attached to artificial intelligence, or, well, it's not a great thing, but we have to do it because it will take over anyway. So what we're seeing is this technological sub-reality, and part of it is to vastly increase the radiation in the atmosphere, and to change the atmosphere dramatically. This is not the only reason. There are much deeper and more far out reasons why they're doing it. But what people don't realise is, if you're going to be attached to a cloud of artificial intelligence, then that cloud needs to be everywhere. It needs to be everywhere on the planet. No one excluded, no area excluded. And this is why people in the high-tech industry, not least Facebook, I mean, Facebook, that's just a social media. That's where you say hello to your mum, isn't it? No, that's the front. Google and Facebook are working very closely with an organization, one of the most sinister on earth, perhaps the most sinister, called DARPA, which is the technological development arm of the Pentagon, which claims that it created the internet. Also, it does things like death rays. Very nice organisation. And they are the driver. DARPA is the driver of this transhumanist agenda, this sub-reality agenda, using technology. And Google and Facebook are fundamentally involved. And Elon Musk, ironically, with his SpaceX operation, is shooting up rockets with satellites on to bathe the entirety of the Earth in Wi-Fi. And what they're saying, it's not fair that someone in the Gobi Desert or in the Sahara Desert doesn't have Wi-Fi. It's not fair. So we've got to put it everywhere, right? So they're shooting up there. Well, you remember last year, One of Musk's rockets exploded when it was about to be launched at Cape Canaveral. Well, what it was about to do was carry a Facebook satellite into space to bathe vast areas of sub-Saharan Africa in Wi-Fi. And as economists have pointed out, there is no economic payback whatsoever from putting Wi-Fi in areas of the world where there are very few people, and very few people still now or even want to use it. But they're still doing it. And to give people an idea of the scale, an Indian rocket was sent up not long ago, which broke the record for launching the most satellites in one rocket launch, 104. They don't, tell us in the newspapers all the satellites that are going up. And what are they doing? They're not shooting outwards, they're shooting inwards, and they're all part of creating this sub-reality. So this is what is happening. And of course, the vast increase in atmospheric radiation has an impact upon the human mind, impact on human emotion, an impact on human health, because what is the body? It is an electromagnetic radiation field or field, so it's got to be impacted upon when the radiation field that we are interacting with is changing because of technological intervention. And these are the levels of what's going on that are way beyond Donald Trump and even the French election. And I'm not saying they're not important. They are relevant because of their immediate impact and what have you. But they want us to focus on who's going to be French president and who's going to be American president and all the rest of it, because then we don't widen our focus and look into these areas we're talking about now, which is how our very atmosphere is being changed in line with an agenda of human control that involves connecting humanity to technology. And it's happening. It's happening. This is what the getting people addicted to technology and smartphones is all about. We're being taken along a journey. Get them addicted to things they hold, then move to things they wear, smart watches and Google Glass and these Bluetooth on your ear. Get them on the body, and the next stage then is we'll get them in the body, and that's what's happening now. Internal microchips. I've just come, like I say, come down from Sweden, and they're being microchipped in Sweden. There was a guy came to the event that had been microchipped in his hand, so that he could work at this particular place, and he could open a door without having to push it. Oh, isn't that great? Let's get microchipped. Let's get externally controlled. Why? Well, the door will open when I walk towards it. I don't have to push it anymore. Isn't life great? I mean, it's madness. But it's happening in Sweden, and it's happening in other places. And this is the real cutting edge of the control system. Of course, it's not the political level. That's the means to an end. The end is technological control of humanity and the human mind and human thinking in the way that I'm describing.